The maître d' recognized me immediately as I stepped into La Belle Vie, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. His welcoming smile faltered when he noticed my attire, not the casual elegance expected for an anniversary dinner, but the sharp confidence of my charcoal business suit. Behind me, 5 distinguished individuals followed, each radiating the unmistakable gravitas of corporate power. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mrs. Ellis, he stammered, we weren't expecting you with additional guests. I'm sure my husband's table can accommodate a few more, I replied, my voice steady despite the thundering in my chest. Through the ambient lighting, I could already see them, my husband David and his executive assistant Vanessa, their heads tilted intimately toward each other at our anniversary table, his hand casually resting on hers. The bottle of Dom Pérignon, my favorite, already half empty between them. What David didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine as he laughed at something Vanessa whispered, was that seated at the bar, strategically positioned with perfect sightlines to their table, was our company's chief financial officer, Marcus. And in exactly 2 minutes, when I approached with the entire board of directors behind me, David's world would collapse with the precision of a controlled demolition. Because no one betrays Emma Ellis, not personally, and certainly not professionally. 3 months earlier, I sat in my home office reviewing quarterly reports for Ellis Innovations, the tech company David and I had built from nothing over 12 years. We'd started in our garage with an innovative data security algorithm I'd developed during my PhD program. David, with his business acumen and charismatic sales approach, had been the perfect partner to take my technical creation to market. Together, we'd grown the company to 300 employees, and last year's IPO had made us both wealthy beyond our wildest dreams. I massaged my temples, fighting a headache as I scrutinized some concerning patterns in the financial statements. Something about the international expansion numbers didn't align with projections I'd reviewed earlier. I made a note to discuss it with Marcus, our CFO, and checked the time. Nearly midnight, and David still wasn't home from his urgent client meeting. My phone buzzed with a text. Jen, my best friend since college and Ellis Innovations chief, operating officer. You still up? Need to talk. Still working. What's up? I replied. Not over text. Breakfast tomorrow? River Cafe, 7 a.m.? The urgency was unusual for Jen, who typically preferred detailed texts over meetings. Everything okay? Just be there, Em, and come alone. Sleep evaded me that night. When David finally came home around 2 a.m., he slipped into bed smelling of unfamiliar perfume and whispered explanations about client dinners running late. I pretended to be asleep, my mind cataloging each inconsistency in his story like entries in a database. The River Cafe was quiet at 7 a.m., most tables still empty. Jen was already there, 2 coffee cups steaming before her, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept even less than I had. I've been debating whether to tell you this for weeks, she said without preamble as I sat down. But after what I discovered yesterday, I can't stay silent. She slid her tablet across the table. On it was an email chain between David and the board, discussing a potential acquisition of a European security firm. I was the CTO and co-founder, yet I'd heard nothing about this. Keep scrolling, Jen instructed, her voice tight. The next email showed David presenting a proposal to restructure the executive team. My role as CTO would be reduced to technical advisor, while Vanessa Barnes would be promoted to Chief Innovation Officer, essentially taking over my division. There's more, Jen said quietly. The board meeting is scheduled during our Paris conference next month, when you'll be giving the keynote. My hands were steady as I placed the tablet down, a strange calm settling over me. How long has this been happening? The restructuring talks? About 2 months. No, I clarified. Vanessa and David. Jen's surprise told me she hadn't connected those dots. What are you talking about? Late nights, new cologne, missed calls when they're supposedly in meetings together, I listed clinically. I suspected, but couldn't confirm. This, I tapped the tablet, is just the professional manifestation of something that's been happening personally. Rather than dissolving into tears, my mind switched into analytical mode. The same focus I used when solving complex algorithms. Forward me everything. I need all the data before determining next steps. Emma, are you okay? Jen reached for my hand. Concern etched across her features. I'm processing, I replied, and planning. Over the next week, I became an investigator in my own life. I hired Megan Zhao, a cybersecurity specialist who'd once interviewed at Ellis Innovations but been rejected by David for being too aggressive. Together, we implemented a comprehensive surveillance strategy without violating any laws, a careful balance I insisted upon. What we uncovered was both heartbreaking and infuriating. David and Vanessa's affair had begun 8 months earlier, shortly after he'd hired her as his executive assistant. Their relationship had quickly evolved from professional to intimate, with hotel meetings disguised as client appointments and weekend getaways listed as business conferences. More concerning were the business implications. David had been systematically positioning Vanessa for greater authority within the company, while preparing to diminish my role. Financial records revealed he'd authorized a substantial bonus package for her that circumvented normal approval channels. Most alarming was evidence that David had shared proprietary technology information with Vanessa that she, in turn, appeared to be feeding to a competitor. He's not just betraying your marriage, Megan observed as we reviewed the evidence in a secure room I'd rented at a co-working space far from any Ellis Innovations offices. He's betraying the company you built. I nodded, a cold clarity settling over me. And he thinks he'll get away with it because I'll be too devastated by the personal betrayal to fight the professional one. What are you going to do? Megan asked. Something methodical, I answered, already formulating a plan. Something surgical. That evening, David informed me he'd arranged a special dinner for our upcoming anniversary at La Belle Vie, the restaurant where he'd proposed 13 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. I've been so busy lately and I know I've been distant, he said, kissing my forehead with practiced affection. But I want to make it special. Just us, reconnecting. I smiled and thanked him, not mentioning I'd already seen the reservation on his calendar. A table for 3 that had been changed to 2 when he realized I could access his schedule. The third person had been Vanessa, whose calendar showed the same dinner but never removed her name. From the entry, my investigation expanded. I reached out to Marcus, our CFO, carefully framing my questions as technical curiosity rather than suspicion. His initial reluctance to discuss financial details without David present confirmed my concerns. Marcus, I finally said during one late evening meeting in his office, I know about the discrepancies in the European acquisition numbers. What I don't know is whether you're involved or just looking the other way. His face paled. Emma, I've been trying to figure out how to approach you for months. David insisted these arrangements had your approval, but the documentation never materialized. Show me everything, I instructed. For 3 hours, Marcus revealed what David had hidden from me. Financial manipulations designed to inflate Vanessa's department while creating a paper trail of supposed failures in my division. There were unauthorized technology transfers to shell companies that appeared to connect back to our main competitor, Vertex Systems. The board meeting next week, Marcus said gravely. David's planning to present evidence that your leadership has compromised several key projects. He's recommending your removal as CTO. And the board believes this? They're concerned. The numbers he's showing them make a compelling case, especially since you've been focused on technology rather than financial oversight. I leaned back, processing this information. Our anniversary dinner is 2 days before that board meeting. Yes, Marcus confirmed, confused by the apparent non sequitur. Perfect timing, I murmured, pulling out my phone to text Jen. I need your help with something, and we'll need Ryan from legal too. By the following week, my plan was set in motion. I had assembled a small trusted team, Jen from operations, Marcus from finance, Ryan from legal, Megan for technical expertise, and my assistant Lisa for logistical coordination. Each had discovered their own reasons to be concerned about David's actions, beyond loyalty to me. We established secure communications channels and compiled evidence into an irrefutable case that documented both the personal betrayal and professional misconduct. I planned each move with the same precision I'd used to design our companies, security protocols. The day before our anniversary, I called the chairman of the board, Eleanor Reynolds, a shrewd businesswoman who had been an early investor in Ellis Innovations. Eleanor, I need to meet with the board, tonight if possible. Emma, the meeting is scheduled for Friday, as you know. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This can't wait, I replied, and it needs to happen without David's knowledge. Her hesitation was brief. Eleanor hadn't reached her position by ignoring warning signs. My house, 8 o'clock. I'll contact the others. That evening, in Eleanor's elegant home library, I presented my findings to the 5 board members. I remained factual and unemotional, focusing on the business implications rather than personal betrayal. As you can see, I concluded after a comprehensive presentation, this isn't just about corporate restructuring, it's about misappropriation of company resources, technology theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions grave. What exactly are you proposing, Emma? Eleanor asked. Tomorrow night is my anniversary. David has arranged dinner at La Belle Vie, believing I'm unaware of his relationship with Vanessa or his plans for the company. I paused, making eye contact with each board member. I suggest you all join us. 7 o'clock. You'll witness everything firsthand, and then we can address the situation immediately. Board member James Chen frowned. This seems unnecessarily theatrical. Couldn't we simply call an emergency meeting? With all respect, James, I replied, David has been carefully constructing a narrative about my competence and stability for months. Any claims I make in a formal meeting will be countered, with his prepared evidence painting me as a resentful spouse. Seeing is believing. Eleanor studied me carefully before nodding. I've never known you to be anything but methodical, Emma. If this is your recommendation, we'll be there. On the morning of our anniversary, David left early for breakfast. Meetings that my surveillance confirmed were with Vanessa at her apartment. He'd called from the car to remind me about dinner. Wear that blue dress I love, he'd suggested. I've missed seeing you dressed up. I spent the day finalizing preparations with my team. Lisa managed a series of carefully timed messages to board members. Ryan ensured all legal documentation was in order for immediate action. Marcus prepared financial statements showing the true status of company projects. Megan secured all digital evidence on encrypted drives beyond David's access. Jen met me at my house to help me prepare, not for the romantic evening David anticipated, but for the corporate confrontation I had orchestrated. The blue dress? She asked, eyeing my selection of the charcoal suit. He's been manipulating my image as much as my role, I explained, applying my makeup with precision. Tonight is about reclaiming my power, not playing to his expectations. At 6:30, I received confirmation that David and Vanessa had arrived at La Belle Vie. Marcus, positioned at the bar, sent a photo showing them seated at the anniversary table, champagne already flowing. David had ordered my favorite, a touching detail that now seemed like a mockery. Jen squeezed my hand as the car dropped us at the restaurant. Entrance. Ready? I straightened my jacket and nodded. Absolutely. Eleanor and the other board members waited discreetly by the entrance, as instructed. I approached them with the confidence I'd built while presenting at international tech conferences. Thank you for coming. Follow my lead, and regardless of what happens, please wait until I've finished speaking before you intervene. Eleanor nodded, a glint of admiration in her eyes. The floor is yours, Emma. The maitre d's discomfort as I requested to join. My husband's table with 5 additional guests was evident, but he professionally led our group through the restaurant. I watched David's face transform as he spotted me. First confusion, then alarm as he recognized Eleanor and the board members behind me. Vanessa froze mid-laugh, her hand suddenly withdrawing from where it had rested on David's arm. Emma. David recovered quickly, standing with a forced smile. What a surprise! I thought we said 7 o'clock. His eyes darted to the board members. And you've brought colleagues? I thought our anniversary deserved a proper celebration, I replied calmly, taking the seat across from him as the maitre d' hurriedly arranged additional chairs. After all, it's not just about our marriage, it's about the company we've built together. The silence that fell over our table was deafening. Around us, the ambient noise of La Belle Vie continued, the gentle clink of silverware, murmured conversations, and soft piano music. But at our table, time seemed suspended. David's eyes darted between my face and the board members, his mind visibly racing to understand what was happening and how to regain control of the situation. Vanessa recovered first, professional smile snapping into place as she extended her hand toward Eleanor. Ms. Reynolds, what an unexpected pleasure. David was just briefing me on some presentation points for Friday's meeting. At his anniversary dinner, Eleanor replied with a raised eyebrow, making no move to accept the offered handshake. I insisted she join for a quick review before celebrating with Emma. David interjected smoothly, falling into the practiced charm that had won over countless clients and investors. But clearly I've confused the timing. Emma, sweetheart, I thought we said 7? I glanced at my watch, an elegant timepiece David had given me after our successful IPO. It's 7:05. Now, I'm exactly on time. The waiter approached, tension radiating from him as he sensed the uncomfortable atmosphere. Would the additional guests care for champagne as well? That would be lovely, I answered before David could speak. And please bring the reserve list. I believe this occasion calls for something more substantial than Dom Pérignon. David's jaw tightened at my subtle dig. I'd always been the wine enthusiast in our relationship, while he generally deferred to sommeliers or ordered recognizable brands to impress. The half-empty bottle on the table confirmed my suspicion that he'd started drinking well before 7. I should go. Vanessa moved to stand, gathering her designer purse. This is a personal celebration. Please stay. I smiled with practiced warmth that didn't reach my eyes. Since you've become such an integral part of Ellis Innovations' future, you should be included in this discussion. David's hand moved subtly, pressing against Vanessa's arm to keep her seated. The gesture wasn't lost on the board members, whose expressions ranged from uncomfortable to intensely observant. What exactly is happening here, Emma? David asked, his voice lowered but edged with warning. I turned to the board. Would anyone care to sample the foie gras? La Belle Vie chef has a remarkable preparation method. Without waiting for responses, I signaled the waiter, who seemed relieved to have a routine task to perform. Emma, David hissed, leaning forward, whatever you think you're doing. I'm celebrating our anniversary, I interrupted pleasantly. 12 years of marriage, 13 years since we founded the company. Quite the accomplishment, wouldn't? You agree, Eleanor? Eleanor, composed as always, nodded. Indeed. Building a company from scratch while maintaining a marriage is challenging. Trust is essential in both enterprises. The pointed comment landed like a stone in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading across David's face. Speaking of trust, I continued, opening my sleek leather portfolio that Lisa had stashed in the restaurant's coat check earlier. I've been reflecting on our journey together, both personal and professional. I removed several photographs and slid them across the table. The first showed David and Vanessa entering the Westin Hotel downtown, date and time stamped for an afternoon when he'd claimed to be meeting with investors. The second captured them at a restaurant across town, his hand intimately placed on the small of her back. The third, most damning, showed them kissing in the executive parking garage at our company headquarters. "What is this?" David demanded, his voice rising enough that diners at nearby tables glanced over. "Documentation," I replied calmly. "I've always believed in thorough record-keeping. Ask anyone at the company. It's something of a trademark of mine." Vanessa had gone pale, her professional composure cracking as she stared at the photos. "These are an invasion of privacy," she whispered. "Interesting perspective," I remarked, considering they were all taken in public spaces. The hotel lobby, the restaurant patio, the company garage, all areas without any reasonable expectation of privacy. Board member Richard Townsend cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Emma, while I understand your distress, perhaps this personal matter isn't purely personal," I finished for him, extracting another set of documents. "These are financial records showing unauthorized bonuses processed for Ms. Barnes, circumventing standard compensation protocols. And these," I slid another folder forward, "are expense reports for hotel rooms, dinners, and weekend trips, coded as client meetings that never occurred." Marcus, who had been observing from the bar, chose this moment to approach our table. "I can verify those financial irregularities," he stated professionally. When I questioned them, I was told they had special authorization. David's face flushed with anger. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing?" "His job," I interjected. Unlike some in the company, Marcus takes his fiduciary responsibility seriously. The appetizers arrived, creating a surreal moment as the waiter carefully arranged delicate portions of foie gras and truffle mousse before each person. No one moved to taste them. David leaned forward, voice lowered to an urgent whisper. "Emma, you're embarrassing yourself and the company. Whatever you think you know, I know that you've been systematically undermining my position as CTO while promoting your mistress to roles she's not qualified for," I stated flatly. "I know you've been manipulating financial reports to create a false narrative about my division's performance. And I know you intended to use Friday's board meeting to push for my removal." The board members exchanged glances, their discomfort now mixed with keen interest. James Chen, always the most financially focused member, was studying the expense reports with a deepening frown. "These allegations are absurd," David scoffed, attempting to gather the documents, but I placed my hand firmly on them. "That's one perspective," I acknowledged. "Here's another." I removed a tablet from my portfolio and placed it in the center of the table. With a few taps, I pulled up an email chain, the same one Jen had first shown me, but now supplemented, with dozens more communications between David, Vanessa, and several external contacts. These emails detail your strategy to remove me from meaningful involvement in the company I co-founded. Particularly interesting is this thread discussing how my emotional reaction to discovering your affair would make me easy to paint as unstable and unfit for leadership. Eleanor picked up the tablet, scrolling through with practiced efficiency, occasionally angling it so other board members could see key passages. Her expression remained neutral, but the tightening around her eyes told me she was not pleased with what she was reading. "Most concerning," I continued, extracting a final set of documents, "are these communications with Anton Diaz at Vertex Systems, our chief competitor, for those who might not be familiar." David's face went from flushed to ashen in seconds. Beside him, Vanessa's breathing became shallow and rapid. "You'll note the attached technical specifications match proprietary algorithms my team developed last quarter." algorithms that somehow appeared in modified form in Vertex's latest security suite. The transmission dates correlate perfectly with Ms. Barnes's access to those files. Access you specifically authorized, David, despite her role having no legitimate need for such technical data. James Chen had abandoned all pretense of discomfort and was now openly reviewing the evidence, his finance-trained eyes narrowing as he connected the dots. "This is industrial espionage," he stated plainly. "That's a serious allegation," David finally managed, his voice strained. "These documents are taken out of context. Vanessa needed those files for the presentation we're preparing." "For Vertex?" I interrupted. "Because according to these financial transfers, someone matching Ms. Barnes's description has been meeting with Vertex representatives and receiving payments through a shell company registered in her mother's maiden name." The maitre d' approached our table, visibly concerned about the growing tension. "Is everything satisfactory with the appetizers? Would you prefer to delay the main course?" "Everything is fine," I assured him with a smile. "But perhaps some privacy screens would be appropriate?" Our discussion has taken a rather sensitive turn. With efficient professionalism, the staff arranged decorative screens around our table, creating a semblance of privacy in the crowded restaurant. The gesture wasn't lost on David, whose expression had transformed from shock to calculating assessment. "Whatever you think you're accomplishing with this spectacle," he said once the staff retreated, "you're only hurting yourself and the company. These half-truths and distortions are backed by forensic financial analysis, digital footprints, and witness statements," I finished for him. "Including testimony from your executive assistant before Vanessa, the one you fired when she refused to falsify calendar entries." Eleanor placed the tablet down deliberately. "David, these communications appear quite explicit. Perhaps you'd care to explain why you told the board Emma was aware of the European acquisition discussions when these emails clearly show you deliberately kept her uninformed." "Business strategy," he replied quickly. "Emma's been increasingly disconnected from day-to-day operations, focused on her technical projects. I was protecting her from distractions while managing the company's growth." "By positioning her replacement?" Eleanor nodded toward Vanessa, who had not touched her champagne and was staring fixedly at the tablecloth. "By ensuring continuity," David countered. "Emma's brilliant with technology, but has shown less interest in the business aspects. The company needs strong leadership in both areas." I allowed myself a small smile. "How considerate of you to make that decision unilaterally about the company I co-founded. The same consideration you showed in bringing your mistress to our anniversary dinner?" David's jaw tightened. "That's unfair." "Is it?" I reached into my portfolio one last time and removed a sealed envelope. "This is what's unfair, David. This is the reservation confirmation you made 3 weeks ago for tonight. Table for 3, not 2. You only changed it yesterday after realizing I could see your calendar." Vanessa finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should never have come." "On that, we agree," I said coolly. David's eyes darted among the board members, assessing his rapidly deteriorating position. Years of business negotiations had taught him when to change tactics. "Emma, I admit I've made personal mistakes, terrible ones that have hurt you, and for that, I'm deeply sorry. But these business allegations are misconstructions of legitimate corporate decisions." "Your remorse is noted," I replied evenly. "Though its timing, after being caught rather than before betraying me, somewhat diminishes its impact." The main courses arrived, creating another moment of surreal normalcy as waiters presented beautifully arranged plates of Wagyu beef, truffle risotto, and Dover sole. The exquisite food sat untouched as the tension continued to build. "So what exactly do you want, Emma?" David finally asked, abandoning pretense. "Half the company? The house? Name your price." The naked calculation in his question, reducing 13 years of partnership to a financial settlement, confirmed everything I needed to know about how he viewed our relationship. "What I want," I said carefully, is accountability. 4, actions to have consequences. For the company we built together to continue thriving without being undermined from within. Eleanor nodded almost imperceptibly, her years of business acumen recognizing that I was moving toward a specific proposal. The board will need to consider these allegations carefully, James Chen stated, his tone measured. If verified, they represent serious breaches of corporate governance. They're already verified, I replied, nodding toward Marcus, who still stood nearby. Marcus has prepared a complete forensic accounting report. Ryan from legal has documentation of the intellectual property theft. Jen from operations has cataloged the personnel violations. All ready for your review tonight. David's expression hardened as he realized how thoroughly I had prepared. You've been planning this for weeks? Months, I corrected. Ever since? I found Vanessa's earring in your car, the same day you claimed to be in Seattle, yet somehow made it home for dinner. Vanessa flinched at this detail, her hand unconsciously moving to touch her ear where an ornate gold earring hung, the match to the one I'd found and quietly kept as the first tangible evidence of their affair. I turned to address the board directly. I've prepared a restructuring proposal that addresses the governance issues while minimizing disruption to the company and our shareholders. It includes David's immediate resignation as CEO, a position that would temporarily be filled by Jen Wilson as COO until a proper search can be conducted. This is absurd, David sputtered. You can't just... The alternative, I continued smoothly, is pursuing criminal charges for the corporate espionage, fraud, and misappropriation of company resources. The evidence has already been secured and documented by independent third parties. The table fell silent as the implications settled over everyone. Eleanor was the first to speak. Emma, while these allegations are deeply concerning, a public scandal would damage shareholder value significantly. Precisely why? I've prepared a discreet transition plan, I agreed, complete with a communication strategy that allows David to resign for personal reasons while we conduct an internal review of security protocols. David stared at me with newfound wariness. The wife he thought would collapse in emotional devastation was instead orchestrating his professional demise with methodical precision. You've thought of everything, he said flatly. Not everything, I corrected. For instance, I didn't anticipate you bringing your mistress to our anniversary dinner. That was a particularly cruel touch, even for you. Vanessa stood abruptly. I need some air. Ms. Barnes, Eleanor's voice stopped her before she could leave. Given the nature of these allegations, I must ask that you not leave the premises until we've had a chance to secure your company devices and access credentials. Vanessa's eyes widened. You're treating me like a criminal. No, James Chen replied matter-of-factly. We're treating you like someone implicated in corporate espionage. There's a significant difference in the potential consequences. Richard Townsend, who had been quietly reviewing the evidence, finally looked up. David, these communications with Vertex, if they're authentic, they potentially violate your employment contract, the corporate governance agreement, and possibly federal law. They're taken out of context, David insisted, but his defense lacked conviction. I reached across the table and picked up the untouched glass of champagne before me, studying the bubbles rising to the surface. Context is important, I agree. Let me provide some. For the past 8 months, you've been sleeping with your assistant while systematically undermining me professionally. You've diverted company resources to fund your affair, manipulated financial reports to damage my professional reputation, and shared proprietary technology with our largest competitor. I took a sip of the champagne, allowing the moment to stretch uncomfortably. And tonight you plan to have dinner with your mistress at our anniversary table, only to hastily uninvite her when you realized I might discover your plans. Yet, she came anyway, eager to celebrate the finalization of your scheme to remove me from my position this Friday. I set the glass down precisely. That's the context, David. Now, shall we discuss the separation agreement I've prepared? Or would you prefer the board to proceed with a formal investigation leading to termination for cause? A text message illuminated my phone on the table. From Marcus. Secured access to David's office and electronic devices as requested. IT team standing by. David noticed the message and the slight smile it brought to my face. You've already moved against me, he realized aloud. Prudent precautions, I replied, to secure company assets. Eleanor picked up her napkin and placed it beside her untouched plate, a businesswoman ready to conclude an unsuccessful negotiation. I believe we've heard enough to warrant immediate action. David, I'll need your company phone and laptop before you leave tonight. You can't be serious, he protested. Based on some emails Emma has selectively shared, this requires proper investigation, not a knee-jerk reaction during what was supposed to be a private dinner. There's nothing selective about forwarding. Your entire email history with Vertex Systems to the board, I noted, which I did approximately 30 minutes ago. I believe Richard has been reviewing them on his phone under the table for the past 10 minutes. Richard Townsend had the grace to look slightly embarrassed at being caught, but nodded confirmation. The communications appear extensive and explicit, including technical specifications identified as Ellis Innovations proprietary technology. David's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, the first sign of true defeat I'd seen from him. Beside him, Vanessa had sunk back into her chair, her earlier professional poise completely abandoned. The company will suffer if this becomes public, David tried one last angle. Stock prices, client confidence, employee morale, all will take significant hits. Indeed, Eleanor agreed. Which is why Emma's proposed solution of a private resignation rather than a public termination seems the most prudent course, provided you cooperate fully with our investigation and security protocols. The elegant restaurant continued its normal service around us, staff moving efficiently between tables, soft music playing, wine being poured, a surreal backdrop to the corporate execution taking place behind our privacy screens. David looked at me directly for the first time since I'd presented the evidence. You planned all of this, gathered evidence for months, recruited allies, prepared legal documents, secured board support, and then chose our anniversary dinner for the final confrontation. Why not just confront me privately when you first suspected? I considered his question carefully, aware of the board members watching our exchange with newfound respect for the calculated precision of my approach. Because you wouldn't have just denied it, I answered truthfully. You would have gaslit me, manipulated evidence, turned colleagues against me, and accelerated your plans to push me out of the company. You've demonstrated repeatedly that you don't fight fair, David, so I created conditions where your typical tactics wouldn't work. The anniversary dinner was particularly inspired, Eleanor noted with professional admiration, ensuring both the personal and professional betrayals were exposed simultaneously. I'm still your wife, I reminded David quietly. You chose our anniversary to finalize plans that would devastate me both personally and professionally. It seemed fitting to use the same occasion to present my response. A subtle shift occurred around the table. The uncomfortable awkwardness of witnessing a marital dispute transformed into collective recognition of a strategic corporate maneuver executed with precision. What happens now? Vanessa asked, her voice small. Now, I said as I gathered my documents back into my portfolio, the board will escort David to headquarters to surrender his access credentials and devices. You'll do the same. Security teams are already securing relevant documents and digital assets. Tomorrow, the company will announce David's resignation for personal reasons. By the time the markets open, the transition will be complete. James, Chen nodded approvingly. Clean, contained, and minimally disruptive to operations. The shareholders will appreciate that. And us? David gestured between himself and me, a strange vulnerability briefly visible beneath his corporate facade. That's a separate discussion, I replied evenly. One that will involve divorce attorneys rather than board members. I recommend finding separate representation for your personal and professional situations, given the potential conflicts. The clinical detachment in my voice seemed to finally penetrate David's remaining defenses. For the first time, genuine regret flickered across his features, not for being caught, but perhaps for what he had destroyed. I never meant for it to go this far, he said quietly. That's the problem with betrayal, David. Once you start down that path, there's no natural stopping point. Each deception requires another to maintain it, until eventually, the entire structure collapses. Eleanor stood, signaling the end of our unusual dinner meeting. David, we'll proceed to headquarters now. Ms. Barnes, you'll accompany us. Emma, will you join as well, or would you prefer to meet us there later? I closed my portfolio with a decisive click. I think I'll stay for dinner. It is my anniversary, after all. The look of surprise on David's face was almost worth the months of pain and planning. You're staying? Alone? Not alone, I corrected as Jen appeared from where she'd been waiting discreetly at the bar. With my friend, who actually supports me rather than undermining me. Besides, I added with the first genuine smile of the evening, I've heard the chocolate souffle here is exceptional, and I've never had the chance to try it during our previous anniversary dinners. As David and Vanessa were escorted out by the board members, I watched 13 years of marriage and professional partnership walk out the door. The expected wave of emotion, grief, loss, vindication, remained curiously subdued, tempered by months of processing what I had discovered. Jen slid into the chair across from me, surveying the untouched gourmet dishes. Well, that was the most intense dinner meeting I've ever witnessed. You were magnificent. I was prepared, I corrected. There's a difference. So, she gestured, to the abundant food, anniversary dinner for two? I signaled the waiter to clear the extra settings and bring fresh plates. It seems fitting. You were the one who showed me the evidence that started all of this. You should share in the conclusion. As the waiters efficiently reset our table, removing the privacy screens and transforming the scene from corporate confrontation back to elegant dining, I felt a weight lifting. The months of investigation, planning, and careful preparation had culminated in a resolution that protected what mattered most to me, my professional legacy and my dignity. To new beginnings, Jen raised her glass. I clinked mine against hers. And to having the right people in your corner. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath that wasn't shadowed by betrayal or consumed by planning my response. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, restructuring the company leadership, navigating the personal and professional fallout, beginning divorce proceedings. But tonight, in this moment, I had reclaimed something essential: control over my own narrative. The chocolate souffle, when it arrived, was indeed exceptional. The maître d' approached as we finished our dessert, his professional composure restored now that the tense confrontation had concluded. Mrs. Ellis, is everything satisfactory? I looked up at him with a calm smile. Actually, it's Dr. Ellis. And yes, everything is precisely as it should be. The morning after the confrontation, at La Belle Vie dawned with an unusual stillness. I woke before my alarm, the events of the previous evening replaying in my mind with cinematic clarity. For months, I had lived in a state of controlled rage and meticulous planning. Now, with the plan executed almost flawlessly, I found myself in unfamiliar emotional territory, neither victorious nor devastated, but somewhere in the liminal space between endings and beginnings. I reached for my phone, unsurprised to find dozens of messages waiting. The most recent was from Eleanor. Emergency board meeting concluded at 3 a.m. David and Barnes escorted from premises. Transition plan approved unanimously. Press release. Scheduled for 8 a.m. Well done, Emma. Next came a series of texts from Jen, who had stayed with me at La Belle Vie long after the confrontation, sharing wine and strategizing about the company's future until the restaurant staff had politely informed us they needed to close. IT completed security protocols, all systems secured, David's access terminated, team meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. to announce changes. Need anything before then? There were no messages from David. According to Marcus's overnight report, David had surrendered his devices, signed the preliminary separation agreement, and left headquarters at approximately 1 a.m., destination unknown. Vanessa had been more emotional but equally compliant, escorted from the building by security at midnight after her devices and credentials were secured. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feeling the plush carpet beneath my feet in the master bedroom of the home David and I had proudly purchased after our IPO. The modernist architecture with its clean lines and open spaces had once represented our shared aesthetic and success. Now it felt like a museum to a relationship that had been dead long before I discovered the truth. The house was eerily quiet without David's morning routine. No shower running, no coffee machine humming, no financial news playing from his tablet. I had grown accustomed to his absences over recent months. But this was different. This wasn't a business trip or an early meeting. This was permanent. I made my way to the kitchen, automatically preparing coffee in the precision pour-over method I preferred. As the water heated, my phone rang. Ryan from legal. "Emma, sorry to call so early." "It's fine, I'm up. What's happening?" "I wanted to give you a heads up before you come in. David's personal attorney contacted me at 6 a.m. They're challenging the separation agreement, claiming coercion and ambush." I smiled slightly, stirring the coffee grounds with precision. "As we anticipated. Have you implemented the contingency response?" "Yes. I've already forwarded them the supplementary evidence package documenting the technology transfer to Vertex. Also reminded them that we've been extremely generous in offering a resignation rather than termination for cause and potential criminal charges." And their response? Immediate backpedaling. They're now requesting a good faith meeting to discuss mutually acceptable terms. The predictability of David's tactics was almost comforting. Even in defeat, he was following the playbook I had anticipated during those long nights of planning. "Schedule the meeting for next week," I instructed. "Let them stew. And Ryan, send them the surveillance footage from the Westin, the part where David specifically discusses using my emotional distress as leverage to force me out of the company." "With pleasure," Ryan replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "See you at 9? I'll be there." After ending the call, I moved through my morning routine with mechanical efficiency. Shower, dress, light makeup. I selected a tailored navy suit that I rarely wore because David had once commented it made me look too corporate and not creative enough, a remark that now carried new significance in light of his systematic efforts to undermine my executive image. As I secured the delicate silver watch my father had given me upon completing my PhD, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. There were no visible signs of the seismic shifts that had occurred in my life. No dramatic weight loss, no stress-induced skin problems, no obvious manifestations of emotional turmoil. If anything, I looked more focused and present than I had in months. The constant vigilance of maintaining a facade while conducting my investigation had been exhausting, in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until it was over. The doorbell rang at 7:45, precisely when expected. Megan Zhao stood on my doorstep, her typically efficient expression softened slightly by concern. "You didn't have to pick me up personally," I said as I gathered my briefcase. "I could have. Driven myself." "Protocol," she replied simply. "After a high-level corporate extraction, we recommend principals not travel alone for the first 72 hours, especially when proprietary technology and potential industrial espionage are involved." The clinical terminology, extraction instead of divorce, principals instead of spouses, was oddly comforting. Megan's security firm had been instrumental in documenting David's betrayal without crossing legal boundaries. "Any updates on David's whereabouts?" I asked as we settled into her discreet black sedan. "He checked into the Four Seasons downtown at 2:13 a.m., she reported, pulling smoothly into morning traffic. "Used his personal credit card, not the corporate one. No visitors. Ordered room service at 3 a.m. Whiskey, not food. His personal. Security protocols are significantly less sophisticated than his corporate ones." "And Vanessa?" "Returned to her apartment. 37 minutes of phone calls to various contacts, primarily family members. Packed a suitcase at approximately 5 a.m. but hasn't left the building. We're maintaining discreet surveillance as requested." I nodded, watching the familiar route to headquarters through the car window. The city looked unchanged. Pedestrians hurrying to work, coffee shops with morning lines, construction projects continuing their slow progress. All completely unaware that one of the city's most successful tech companies was about to announce a major leadership change. "The press release goes out in 10 minutes, I noted, checking my watch. Megan nodded. "Security teams are in position at all company locations. IT has temporarily frozen external communications channels to prevent data exfiltration during the announcement. Marcus has implemented the financial continuity protocols you specified." Her methodical reporting grounded me as we approached Ellis Innovations headquarters, a gleaming glass building downtown that we had moved into just 2 years earlier. David had insisted on the prestigious address and architectural statement, while I had fought for more practical considerations like proximity to tech talent and transportation. Another battle that made more sense in retrospect. As we pulled into the executive garage, I spotted Jen waiting by the private elevator, tablet in hand. Her expression was professionally neutral, but I could read the concern in her eyes. "Everything ready?" I asked as I approached. "All set. Leadership. Team assembled in the main conference room, board members joining virtually. Press release scheduled to hit the wires in." She checked her watch. 7 minutes. The three of us rode the elevator in silence to the executive floor. Unlike the typical open-plan workspace that dominated most of the building, this floor featured private offices for senior leadership, with David's corner office being the largest and most impressive. My own office, though technically equal in square footage, had always seemed secondary in placement and design, another detail that now registered differently. David cleared out his personal items, Jen informed me as we passed his office. The door stood open, revealing a space that looked strangely untouched despite the late-night evacuation. Security supervised. Everything was documented and recorded as specified in the separation protocol. I paused at the threshold, taking in the space where David had orchestrated so much deception. The wall of awards and photographs told the story he had carefully constructed. David Ellis, visionary CEO, accepting industry accolades, speaking at conferences, meeting with tech luminaries. Tucked among them were a few photos of us together, strategically placed to suggest a united front. The narrative was clear. Ellis Innovations was David's company, with me as the technical support. His personal items were removed, but we left. The awards and company-related displays until legal determines ownership, Jen explained, misreading my pause as concern. "It's fine," I assured her. "The story those tell is already obsolete." We continued to the main conference room where the leadership team waited in a state of controlled tension. The collection of executives represented the company's growth from our garage startup to a publicly traded corporation. Some had been with us almost from the beginning. Others were newer additions brought in to manage our expansion. All looked up with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern as I entered. Marcus sat near the head of the table, financial reports neatly arranged before him. Ryan from legal was engaged in a quiet discussion with our chief compliance officer. The heads of sales, marketing, and product development sat together, clearly having been sharing theories about the emergency meeting. Conspicuously absent were David and Vanessa, their empty seats creating visible gaps in the usual arrangement. Most telling was the reaction to my entrance, a subtle straightening of postures, attentive focus, and the immediate cessation of side conversations. They had been informed of David's temporary absence, but not the full circumstances or permanent nature of the change. "Good morning," I began, taking the chair at the head of the table that had traditionally been David's. "Thank you for adjusting your schedules for this meeting. Before we begin, I need to inform you that Ellis Innovations is announcing a leadership change this morning. The press release would be hitting the wires at that exact moment, carefully crafted to balance transparency with discretion. Ellis Innovations, NASDAQ ELS, announces that co-founder and CEO David Ellis has resigned to pursue personal interests. Co-founder and CTO Dr. Emma Ellis will assume the role of interim CEO, with COO Jennifer Wilson taking on expanded operational responsibilities while a formal executive search is conducted. The board of directors expresses gratitude for Mr. Ellis's contributions and confirms its confidence in the company's strategic direction and leadership team." On the conference room screens, Eleanor and the other board members appeared via video link, their expressions professionally composed despite the unusual circumstances and late-night emergency session. "As the press release states," I continued, "David has resigned from his position, effective immediately. This was a personal decision, accepted by the board after careful consideration." The careful phrasing wasn't lost on the executives, most of whom had enough corporate experience to recognize a forced resignation when they heard one. Several exchanged glances, while others studied me with new assessment. Additionally, Vanessa Barnes is no longer with the company. Her responsibilities will be temporarily distributed among the existing team while we evaluate the appropriate structure moving forward. Our head of sales, Michael Deering, was the first to voice the question clearly on everyone's mind. "Emma, while we appreciate the information, this is unexpected. Is there more context you can provide about these sudden departures?" I met his gaze steadily. "What I can share is that during a routine security review, we identified concerns regarding information management and governance protocols. The board determined that leadership changes were necessary to address these issues and ensure the company's continued success." The carefully constructed explanation contained enough truth to be credible while avoiding the messy personal details. Several executives nodded with understanding. Information security was paramount in our industry, and breaches were treated with the utmost seriousness. "A full security audit is underway," Ryan added, supporting my narrative. "As part of this process, we're implementing temporary communication protocols and reviewing access credentials across the organization." Marcus took his cue to distribute financial briefing documents. "I've prepared an overview of our current financial position and projections. As you'll see, the company remains strong, with all key metrics on or exceeding target. The combination of reassurance about business fundamentals and the implied seriousness of the security issue created exactly the framing we had planned. Concern without panic, recognition of significance without destabilization." Eleanor spoke from the video screen, her authoritative presence adding weight to the transition. "The board has complete confidence in Emma's leadership during this transition. We've worked closely with the executive team to ensure continuity of operations and strategic initiatives." As the meeting progressed, I guided the discussion through immediate priorities, security protocols, and communication strategies for team members and clients. The initial shock gave way to professional focus as each leader engaged with their specific responsibilities in the transition plan. Throughout, I maintained the calm, measured demeanor I had perfected during months of investigation. Inside, however, I was acutely aware of the subtle power shift occurring in the room. Executives who had previously directed their comments primarily to David now focused on me. Those who had sometimes spoken over me in past meetings now waited for me to finish. The change wasn't dramatic or universal, but it was palpable. The first indicators of a reshaping organization. As the meeting concluded, I asked the leadership team to stay for individual briefings throughout the morning. This transition will naturally raise questions throughout the organization. It's essential we present a unified message focused on continuity and security. The executives filed out to prepare for their departmental meetings, leaving me with Jen, Marcus, and Ryan, my core team for the investigation, and now for the transition. Initial market reaction is neutral to positive, Marcus reported, checking his tablet. Stock price is stable with slightly higher than normal volume. Financial analysts are requesting more information, but the security review explanation seems to be providing adequate context for now. HR reports 6 calls. From David already this morning, Jen added. He's trying to reach various team members, presumably to shape the narrative. As instructed, all calls are being logged but not connected. Ryan handed me a legal brief. His attorneys have already revised their position. They're now requesting only the standard executive separation package and accelerated vesting of his existing stock options. No additional demands. I reviewed the document, noting the dramatic retreat from their initial aggressive stance. They must have reviewed the evidence package and recognized the potential criminal implications, Ryan confirmed with professional satisfaction. The technology transfer to Vertex alone could trigger federal charges. A notification appeared on my phone, a text from Megan, who had moved to oversee security operations. David attempting to enter the building. Security implementing. Protocol 4 as instructed. Protocol 4 was our predetermined response. Professional but firm denial of access, conducted in the most discreet manner possible to avoid creating a scene that could damage company morale or generate unwanted publicity. I should go downstairs, I said, rising from my chair. Is that wise? Jen asked with concern. The security team can handle it. They can, I agreed. But this isn't just about security protocols. This is a defining moment for the company. Culture. How we handle David's departure, with dignity but firmness, sets the tone for everything that follows. Ryan nodded with understanding. I'll come with you. Having legal present ensures everything is properly documented. In the elevator descending to the lobby, I found myself in a moment of unexpected calm. For months, I had imagined the eventual confrontation with David, planning for rage, accusations, emotional manipulation. Now that it was imminent, I felt only a clear-eyed resolve to conclude this chapter professionally. The lobby of Ellis Innovations was designed to impress: soaring ceilings, cutting-edge architecture, and a massive digital display showcasing our technology. Security had discreetly positioned additional personnel near the entrance, where David stood engaged in increasingly animated conversation with the head of building security. I built this company, he was saying as we approached, his voice controlled but edged with frustration. This is a misunderstanding that needs to be addressed immediately. Seeing me, David straightened, automatically adjusting his tie, a gesture I'd seen countless times before important meetings. Emma, this has gone far enough. We need to talk privately and resolve this situation before irreparable damage is done. I maintained a professional distance, aware of the reception staff and security personnel witnessing the exchange. David, as you know, your access has been suspended pending the completion of our security review. If you'd like to communicate with the company, please do so through the appropriate legal channels. This is absurd, he replied, lowering his voice but intensifying his tone. You've made your point. You're hurt and angry about personal matters, and you've demonstrated your power. But this scorched earth approach will damage everything we've built. The familiar manipulation, framing my actions as emotional overreaction rather than legitimate response to his betrayal, might have worked months ago. Now it only confirmed the righteousness of my course. This isn't about making a point, David. It's about protecting the company from risks you introduced. The board has reviewed the evidence and made its decision. Ryan stepped forward, maintaining a respectful but firm demeanor. Mr. Ellis, I have to advise against continuing this conversation in a public setting. The separation agreement you signed specifically outlines the approved communication channels during this transition period. David's gaze hardened as he looked between us. The man accustomed to commanding every room, to having his directives followed without question, was confronting a reality where his authority had evaporated overnight. You've turned them all against me, he said quietly. Convinced the board, manipulated the executive team. How long have you been planning this coup? This isn't a coup, I replied evenly. It's a consequence. As for planning, I learned from your example, David. You spent months positioning Vanessa to replace me, manipulating financial reports to undermine my division, and sharing proprietary technology with competitors. I simply gathered the evidence and presented it to the board. A flicker of unease crossed his face, the realization that I knew even more than I had revealed at dinner. Whatever you think you know is documented, verified, and in the hands of our legal team, I finished for him. David, this conversation isn't productive for either of us. Please respect the board's decision and the separation process. His jaw tightened, but something in my calm certainty seemed to finally penetrate. The David Ellis I had known for 13 years, the master negotiator, the persuasive visionary, had always known when to change tactics in a losing battle. We built this company together, he said, a new note of genuine regret in his was, whatever happened between us personally, you can't deny that. I don't deny it, I acknowledged, which makes your betrayal of me, of our company, of everything we built, all the more significant. A security alert vibrated, subtly on my phone. Glancing down, I saw Megan's warning. Barnes attempting to access R&D lab at North Campus, security responding. David noticed my reaction. Vanessa? Also attempting to access company facilities despite having her credentials revoked, I confirmed. It seems coordination remained. Your strong suit even in this. His expression confirmed my suspicion. This wasn't a coincidence, but a coordinated attempt to retrieve or access something specific. My months of surveillance had made me attuned to even his subtle reactions. Whatever you're trying to recover, David, it's already secured. Every file, every communication, every piece of technology, all documented and preserved. For the first time, genuine alarm showed in his eyes. Emma, there are aspects of this situation you don't understand. Competitive pressures, market, forces. Save it for your attorneys, Ryan interjected firmly. Any further attempts to access company facilities or systems will be documented and may impact the terms of your separation agreement. David took a step back, finally accepting the immovability of his situation. This isn't over, Emma. Actually, it is, I replied with quiet certainty. 13 years of partnership, ended by your choices. The company will move forward. I'll move forward. The only question remaining is how much further damage you're willing to inflict on yourself through continued resistance. Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked back toward the elevator, Ryan beside me. Through the reflection, in the brushed steel doors, I watched David stand motionless in the lobby for several moments before finally turning to leave, his typically confident posture now bearing the unmistakable weight of consequences finally catching up to actions. In the elevator, Ryan exhaled slowly. That went better than expected. It went exactly as expected, I replied. David always recalculates when facing immovable obstacles. His attempt to access the building wasn't about reconciliation. It was about retrieval, something specific they needed to recover or conceal. Should we be concerned? No, I assured him. Whatever they were after, Megan's team secured it during last night's protocol implementation. Their synchronized attempts at different locations only confirm we were right to move decisively. The elevator opened onto the executive floor, where Jen waited with an update. Emergency board meeting is concluding. All departments have been briefed. Initial employee response is stable, concern, but not panic. And the Vertex connection? Marcus implemented the financial tracking. Protocols. He's identified 3 additional transactions that appear to connect to the technology transfer. All documented and secured. As we walked toward the conference room where board members were still visible on the video screens, I felt a moment of genuine pride in the team we had assembled. Professionals who had recognized the threat to the company and worked methodically to address it. Eleanor noticed me entering the frame and nodded with approval. Emma, we were just discussing the security protocol implementation. Exemplary work by your team. Thank you, Eleanor. We've just had an attempted access situation. That's been resolved. The board chair's expression remained composed, but her eyes narrowed slightly. David? Yes, and Vanessa Barnes at another location simultaneously. No breach occurred. Security followed established protocols. James Chen, the financial expert on the board, leaned forward. This confirms our concerns about potential ongoing risk. I move we accelerate the full security audit and implement the enhanced protection measures Emma recommended for our core technology assets. The motion passed unanimously, another indicator of how thoroughly the board's confidence in David had collapsed when presented with concrete evidence of his actions. As the meeting concluded, my phone displayed a notification that made me pause. A personal email from David, sent to my private account rather than my company address. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk. Privately." I showed it to Ryan, who immediately frowned. I wouldn't engage outside official channels. His attorneys have already agreed to the communication protocols. I agree, I replied, but I'm curious what approach he's trying now. The synchronized access. Attempts failed, so he's shifting tactics. Opening the email, I found a message that alternated between conciliation and implied threat. Emma, what happened between us is deeply regrettable, but this corporate warfare benefits neither of us. There are aspects of certain technology transfers you don't fully understand, arrangements with strategic importance beyond your security concerns. Before this escalates further, we should meet privately to discuss a resolution that protects both our interests. Otherwise, public disclosures may become necessary that would damage the company's reputation irreparably. David. I forwarded the email to Ryan, who read it with growing indignation. This borders on blackmail. He's threatening to damage the company if you don't meet his terms. More importantly, I noted, he's confirming the technology transfers were deliberate, not accidental. That's additional evidence of knowing misconduct. Ryan's expression shifted to one of reluctant admiration. You knew he would incriminate himself if pressured. David has always believed he's the smartest person in any situation, I replied. Under pressure, he reverts to tactics that worked in the past. In this case, veiled threats and the implication that I don't understand the bigger picture without his guidance. How do you want to respond? I considered the question carefully. The confrontation in the lobby and now this email represented David's initial attempts to regain control, first through direct assertion of authority, now through a combination of conciliation and threat. His predictable patterns were both his strength as a business strategist and his vulnerability in this situation. We don't respond directly, I decided. Forward the email to his attorneys with a formal reminder about approved communication channels and copy the board. His attempt to circumvent the established process and issue veiled threats only reinforces the concerns that led to his removal. As Ryan departed to implement this response, I turned to find Jen waiting with another update. The all-hands meeting is scheduled for 2 p.m. Leadership team is prepared with their departmental communication plans. And she hesitated slightly. Megan's team intercepted what appears to be a coordinated data extraction attempt from remote access points. David and Vanessa? No, different source. Preliminary analysis suggests Vertex systems. The timing wasn't coincidental. Our competitors were already probing for weaknesses during the leadership transition, perhaps encouraged by whatever information David and Vanessa had previously provided. Implement Security Protocol 7, I instructed. Full network isolation for core technology systems, enhanced monitoring on all external access points, and accelerate the encryption updates, scheduled for next week. As Jen coordinated the security response, I moved toward my office. Not the CTO space I had occupied for years, but the CEO's suite that had been David's domain. The transition plan approved by the board included my temporary occupation of this space during the leadership restructuring, a symbolic as well as practical measure to establish continuity of authority. Entering what had been David's sanctuary, I was struck by how the space reflected his priorities. Impressive, but not functional. Designed to showcase status rather than facilitate work. The expansive desk faced the door rather than the windows, positioning visitors in the submissive role. Awards and recognition dominated the wall displays, with minimal reference to the technical innovations that had built the company's value. I set my laptop on the desk, but remained standing, surveying the room that represented so much of what had gone wrong in our partnership. David had gradually shifted from building something meaningful to maintaining an image of success, from creating value to controlling perception. My phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. Security breach attempts confirm our concerns. Board authorizing full investigation into Vertex connection. Recommend you prepare statement for analysts. Confidence in security measures without specific details on threats. Another message followed immediately from Marcus. Stock experiencing minor volatility as leadership change news spreads. Analysts requesting briefing. Recommend direct communication from you as interim CEO. The cascade of operational demands was oddly centering. After months of investigation and planning for this transition, the actual implementation brought a clarity of purpose that transcended the personal betrayal. This was about protecting the company, the employees who depended on us, the technologies we had created, and the foundation we had built. I moved to the window, looking out over the city from this highest floor of our headquarters. Somewhere out there, David was likely huddled with attorneys, Vanessa was packing for a hasty departure, and Vertex executives were calculating how to exploit the situation. Yet here, in the heart of Ellis Innovations, a team of professionals was methodically securing what we had built, ensuring continuity despite the betrayal at the highest level. The personal reckoning, the full emotional processing of David's betrayal, would come later. For now, there was a company to lead, employees to reassure, technologies to protect, and a future to secure. I had spent months preparing for this day, anticipating every contingency, planning each response. Now that it had arrived, I found myself not defeated by betrayal, but energized by purpose. I turned from the window and took a seat at the desk, opening my laptop to begin drafting the all-hands address. The words came with surprising clarity. Today marks a significant transition for Ellis Innovations. While leadership changes can create uncertainty, our foundation remains strong, built on technological excellence, operational integrity, and the collective talent of everyone in this organization. As we move forward, our priorities remain unwavering, protecting our innovations, serving our clients, and creating value through technology that matters. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in months, it was a path. I was walking in the full light of truth rather than the shadow of deception. Whatever David had stolen from our relationship, he hadn't managed to take the company we had built or the future we could still create. Different now, but perhaps stronger for having survived the test of betrayal. 2 weeks after the fateful anniversary dinner, I stood at the podium in our company's main auditorium, addressing the assembled employees of Ellis Innovations for my first formal town hall as interim CEO. The room was packed, with additional staff joining via video from our satellite offices. The atmosphere held a palpable mix of curiosity, concern, and cautious optimism. As many of you know, I began, surveying the faces before me. Ellis Innovations was born in a garage 13 years ago with a simple but powerful idea: that data security could be both stronger and more accessible. What started as an algorithm on a whiteboard has grown into the company that employs over 300 of you today. I paused, letting my gaze travel across the audience. Some faces I had known for years, others were newer additions who knew me primarily as the technical co-founder, the CTO who typically spoke about innovation roadmaps rather than company direction. The past 2 weeks have brought significant change to our leadership structure. Change can create uncertainty, and uncertainty can breed rumors. Today, I want to address those directly and share our path forward. The transition had been smoother, in some ways than anticipated, more challenging in others. The press had initially accepted the narrative of David's resignation for personal reasons, but industry insiders had begun speculating about deeper issues. Vertex Systems had issued a carefully worded statement denying any improper relationship with Ellis Innovations' leadership, which only fueled speculation. Our stock had experienced moderate volatility before stabilizing at slightly below pre-announcement levels. First, let me be clear about our financial position, I continued, advancing to a slide that Marcus had prepared. Ellis Innovations remains strong, with all key performance indicators meeting or exceeding projections. Our cash reserves are robust, our client retention is stable, and our development milestones are on track. The data told a story of corporate health that contradicted the whispers of crisis that inevitably follow leadership changes. I could see tension visibly easing in some employees' postures as they absorbed the concrete evidence of stability. Second, regarding the leadership transition, David Ellis has resigned as CEO, and the board has appointed me as interim chief executive while we conduct a thorough search process for permanent leadership. This search will include both internal and external candidates with a focus on identifying the right leader to guide our next phase of growth. I deliberately avoided mentioning Vanessa Barnes, whose absence had sparked particularly vivid speculation throughout the company. Human Resources had officially classified her departure as a resignation, though the circumstances remained confidential. The calculated omission from my address would speak volumes to those attuned to corporate subtleties. Third, and most importantly, our strategic direction remains unchanged. The security framework innovation that many of you have been developing for the Phoenix project continues to be our highest priority. Recent security protocol enhancements were implemented to protect this groundbreaking work, not to signal any shift in our technical approach. The Phoenix project was our next-generation security framework, the innovation that David and Vanessa had apparently been sharing with Vertex. Only a handful of people knew the full extent of that breach. But the entire technical staff had experienced the suddenly intensified security measures implemented in its wake. Finally, I want to address the elephant in the room, my role in this transition. This was the delicate part, acknowledging the leadership shift without revealing the personal betrayal that had precipitated it. Jen had advocated for complete transparency, arguing that rumors would fill any information void. Ryan from Legal had countered with concerns about potential shareholder lawsuits if we publicly detailed David's misconduct. I had ultimately crafted a middle path. Some of you have worked with both David and me since the early days. Others know us primarily through all-hands meetings and company communications. What you may not know is that while David has been the public face of Ellis Innovations, the technical and operational foundations of this company have always been a deeply collaborative effort. I advanced to a slide showing our original patent filings, documents listing both our names but primarily featuring my technical contributions. My transition from CTO to interim CEO isn't a dramatic pivot, but a realignment with the company's technical roots. In the coming months, as we search for permanent leadership, we'll be emphasizing what has always been our core strength: technological innovation that solves real security challenges. The presentation continued with operational updates and strategic initiatives, deliberately normalizing the transition and focusing attention on the future rather than the disrupted past. As I concluded and opened the floor for questions, I could sense a subtle shift in the room. Not complete comfort with the change, but a collective exhale as employees recognized that the company's foundation remained solid despite the leadership. Earthquake. The questions came rapidly about product roadmaps, client reactions, organizational structure, and inevitably, David's future involvement with the company. David remains a significant shareholder, I acknowledged in response to that particularly pointed inquiry from a longtime engineer. However, he no longer has an operational role or board position. Our focus now is on moving forward with the team assembled in this room. After 45 minutes of frank discussion, I concluded the session and watched as employees filed out, conversation flowing more naturally than when they had entered. Jen approached from where she had been monitoring reactions from the side of the stage. "That went well," she observed. "They needed to hear directly from you." "Did you catch the side conversations?" I asked, gathering my notes from the podium. Most seemed positive. Relief primarily, though the sales team still has concerns about client perception. She hesitated slightly. "There's still speculation about what really happened with David and Vanessa." "Let them speculate," I replied. "As long as it doesn't impact performance, people will eventually focus on the future rather than the past." We moved from the auditorium to the executive conference room, where the leadership team waited for our post-town hall assessment. The group had evolved over the past 2 weeks, some executives leaning into the transition with newfound energy, others still carefully calibrating their positions in the shifted power landscape. "Excellent presentation, Emma," Marcus opened as we entered. Transparent without being destabilizing. "The questions were more operational than personal," Michael from sales added. "That's a positive sign. Last week's conversations were all about David. Today they're focused on business continuity." I took my place at the head of the table, a position that still carried the faintest echo of strangeness after years of sitting to David's right as CTO. "Client reactions?" I directed the question to Michael, whose team had been on the front lines of managing external relationships through the transition. "Mixed, but stabilizing. 3 clients requested reassurance meetings, which I've conducted personally with demonstrations of our enhanced security protocols. Most were satisfied with our communications. 2 have placed pending contracts on temporary hold, but not canceled." "And North Star Financials?" I asked, referencing our largest client, one with personal connections to David through golf club memberships and charity boards. Michael grimaced slightly. "They've requested a direct meeting with you. Their CISO has questions about the security, enhancements that they say only you can address." I nodded, having anticipated this particular challenge. North Star represented nearly 15% of our annual revenue, a client relationship David had personally cultivated and guarded. Their request for a direct meeting with me wasn't just about technical reassurance, but about assessing the new leadership dynamics. "Schedule it for next week," I instructed. "And Michael, prepare a detailed briefing on their security implementation and any concerns they've raised over the past 6 months." The meeting continued with updates from each department. Finance reporting stable investor relations, HR addressing reorganization of responsibilities previously held by Vanessa, legal updating on the formalization of David's separation agreement. Throughout, I was struck by the professionalism of the team we had built. Professionals responding to organizational trauma with measured competence rather than panic. Before we conclude, There's one additional matter, I said as the updates finished. This morning, our security team detected another systematic attempt to access our development servers, specifically targeting Phoenix project repositories. The atmosphere in the room instantly sharpened. Ryan from legal leaned forward. Vertex again? The digital signatures matched their previous attempts, I confirmed, but with an interesting evolution in approach. They're using access credentials that were valid until our security reset 2 weeks ago. The implication hung in the air. Someone who had access before the transition was continuing to feed information to our competitor. Have we identified the source? Marcus asked, his customary financial focus giving way to strategic concern. Not conclusively, but the pattern suggests it's not coming from David or Vanessa directly. Their credentials were among the first revoked, and these attempts involve authentication codes that remained active until our systematic reset. Michael frowned. Are you suggesting they had additional accomplices within the company? It's one possibility we need to consider, I acknowledged. Megan's security team is conducting a forensic analysis of access patterns for the past 6 months, looking for anomalies that might identify other compromised credentials. The revelation cast a shadow over the progress we had been celebrating. The betrayal might extend beyond David and Vanessa to a broader network, a concerning prospect for a company built on security technology. In the meantime, I continued, we're implementing compartmentalized access to Phoenix. Each team will work with isolated components rather than the full architecture. It will slow development somewhat, but dramatically reduce the risk of complete compromise. The leadership team absorbed this news with appropriate gravity. Security breaches were not just operational challenges for Ellis Innovations, but existential threats to our market position and reputation. Ryan, prepare legal options for addressing Vertex's continued attempts to access our systems. Marcus, review all financial transactions with vendors who might have tangential access to our development environment. Michael, quietly assess whether any client technical conversations might have included inappropriate levels of detail about Phoenix. The meeting concluded with this renewed sense of vigilance, the leadership team departing with clear directives and heightened awareness. Only Jen remained behind as the room cleared. You didn't mention the other development, she observed once we were alone. No, I acknowledged. That remains between us, Megan and Eleanor, for now. The other development was potentially more personal than professional. A series of unusual access attempts to my home security system detected by Megan's team the previous night. Not a full breach, but multiple sophisticated probing attempts that went well beyond random hacking. Megan's team confirmed it wasn't routine, Jen pressed. Someone is specifically targeting your personal security now, not just company systems. I'm aware, I replied, gathering my materials from the conference table. The security protocols at my home have been upgraded, and Megan's team is monitoring all access attempts. Jen studied me with the frank assessment that had characterized our friendship since college. Emma, I know you've been handling everything with remarkable composure, but this is escalating beyond professional retaliation. If David is... We don't know it's David, I interrupted. It could be Vertex attempting to access personal devices that might contain company information. It could be opportunistic hackers aware of our leadership transition and testing for vulnerabilities. Or yes, it could be more personal. You should consider additional physical security, Jen insisted, not just digital protections. I nodded, acknowledging her concern while compartmentalizing it alongside the dozens of other issues requiring attention. I'll discuss options with Megan. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of operational meetings, client calls, and strategy sessions. By early evening, most employees had departed, leaving the executive floor quiet, save for the soft hum of the building systems. I remained in what had been David's office, now temporarily mine, reviewing security protocols for the upcoming North Star meeting. A gentle knock at the door revealed Marcus, his typical precise appearance showing subtle signs of the long days we had all been working. A slightly loosened tie, the faintest shadow of stubble on his normally clean-shaven face. "I've completed the financial trace on vendor relationships," he reported, placing a folder on my desk. "Nothing conclusive, but 3 service providers show unusual payment patterns that might warrant deeper investigation." I glanced through his meticulous analysis. "These consulting invoices for the European expansion." "Yes," Marcus nodded. "The services described are vague, the deliverables unmeasurable, and the approval process bypassed standard protocols, all authorized directly by David over the past 7 months." Another thread in the unraveling tapestry of David's deception. Consultants paid for undefined services related to the European expansion he had kept hidden from me. "Cross-reference these vendors with any connections to Vertex or their parent company," I instructed, "and check for personal relationships with David or Vanessa, shared board memberships, alumni associations, social connections." Marcus nodded, his expression betraying a mixture of professional determination and personal disappointment. He had worked closely with David for years, trusted him as CEO and financial steward of the company. "It's still difficult to reconcile," he admitted quietly. David was always so insistent on financial discipline, on protecting the company's resources. To discover he was simultaneously. "Compartmentalization," I supplied when he trailed off. David could maintain contradictory behaviors because he separated them in his mind: financial disciplinarian in official processes, personal exploiter through hidden channels. Marcus nodded slowly. "A useful perspective. Thank you." He gathered his notes and moved toward the door before pausing. "Emma, the board meeting tomorrow. Eleanor has requested detailed contingency plans if the security breach extends beyond what we currently know. Should I prepare worst-case financial scenarios?" "Yes, but deliver them directly to Eleanor and me, not to the full board yet. We need to balance transparency with avoiding unnecessary panic." After Marcus departed, I moved to the window wall overlooking the city, now illuminated by early evening lights. 13 years of partnership with David had taught me his patterns, his strategies, his default responses to challenges. That knowledge had allowed me to anticipate his betrayal once I found the first evidence, to plan my response, to execute the transition that protected the company from his misconduct. Now I found myself using that same intimate knowledge to trace the continuing threads of his deception, identifying vendors who matched his preference for plausible deniability, recognizing security breach attempts that aligned with his technical understanding, anticipating his next moves as he adjusted to his dramatically altered circumstances. My phone chimed with a notification from Ryan. Separation agreement signed. David's formal resignation finalized with all stipulated conditions. Legal transition complete. One chapter conclusively ended, though the reverberations would continue. My phone chimed again almost immediately. Megan this time. Home security. Alert. Someone attempted physical access to your residence. Security team responding. All systems secure. The escalation Jen had warned about was manifesting faster than anticipated. I immediately called Megan. "What exactly happened?" I asked. When she answered, "Sophisticated approach," she replied, her characteristic efficiency undimmed despite the concerning development. "Someone attempted to use a duplicated access card at your garage entrance. When that failed, they tried to override the security panel with a device designed to simulate authorized credentials. Both attempts triggered silent alerts. My team was on site within 4 minutes, but the subject had already departed. Surveillance imagery? Partial capture only. Subject was wearing a hooded jacket and kept their face angled away from known camera positions. Suggests familiarity with your security setup. The implication was clear. Someone who knew my home layout, my security systems. The list of possibilities was short, with David at the top. I've deployed additional countermeasures, Megan continued, and positioned a security detail nearby. Do you want to relocate temporarily? We have secure alternatives ready. I considered the option briefly before declining. No, but implement the advanced monitoring protocol we discussed. And Megan, if it happens again, I want the subject detained, not just observed. After ending the call, I found myself staring at the scattered papers on the desk. Security protocols, financial analyses, client briefings, the operational detritus of corporate leadership during crisis. But the attempted breach at my home had shifted the situation from purely professional to personally threatening. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, I permitted myself a moment of raw emotion, not the controlled analytical anger that had fueled my investigation, but genuine hurt and indignation. 13 years together, building a life and company in partnership, ended not just with betrayal, but with what appeared to be escalating hostility. The moment passed quickly, replaced by the clear-eyed resolve that had carried me through the past months. I gathered my materials, secured sensitive documents in the office safe, and prepared to depart for the evening. Whatever David's next move, whether the home security breach was his doing or something else entirely, my response would continue to be measured, strategic, and protective of both the company and myself. The executive floor was completely deserted as I made my way to the elevator. The familiar spaces seemed different in the evening quiet, the absence of David's larger-than-life presence particularly noticeable in these halls he had once commanded with such confidence. My phone rang as I reached the parking garage. Eleanor Reynolds, the board chair who had become an unexpected ally through the transition. Emma, I've just reviewed the security incident report Megan forwarded to me. This is deeply concerning. Yes, I agreed, scanning the parking area with heightened awareness before moving toward my car, though we can't conclusively identify who was behind it. Perhaps not legally, Eleanor replied, but realistically the list of possibilities is quite short. Have you considered that David may be more desperate than we anticipated? The financial records Marcus uncovered today suggest significant personal exposure if certain transactions are fully investigated. You've seen the vendor analysis already? Marcus thought I should be immediately informed given my role in overseeing the audit committee. Emma, some of these transactions potentially cross from corporate misconduct into personal financial fraud. This was a significant development. The distinction between corporate governance violations and potentially criminal behavior would dramatically change the nature of our response and David's exposure. Marcus and I will review everything in detail before tomorrow's board meeting, I assured her. In the meantime, we're enhancing security across all fronts. Good. And Emma, her voice took on a more personal tone. Take care of yourself. Corporate conflicts rarely become physical, but transitions this abrupt with potential legal implications can create unpredictable behaviors. After assuring Eleanor that appropriate security measures were in place, I ended the call and drove from the parking garage with heightened awareness of my surroundings. Megan had arranged for discreet security to monitor my movements, visible now that I knew to look for them in the form of a gray sedan that pulled into traffic several cars behind me. Rather than proceeding directly home, I made an unplanned stop at the small technology museum where I had served on the educational advisory board for years. The evening exhibition featured young women demonstrating coding projects, a program I had helped establish to encourage greater diversity in technical fields. The museum director was surprised but delighted by my unexpected appearance. Dr. Ellis, we didn't know you were coming tonight. Last-minute decision, I explained, with a genuine smile, my first of the day. I needed a reminder of why we do all this. For the next hour, I moved among the exhibition booths, listening to teenage girls explain their projects with infectious enthusiasm. Their innovations were impressive: environmental monitoring systems, accessibility tools for disabled users, security applications that reflected creative approaches to persistent problems. One particularly poised young woman walked me through her project, a secure communication system designed specifically for domestic violence survivors. The user can instantly switch to an innocent-looking app if someone is monitoring their activity, she explained, but the secure messages remain accessible through a disguised authentication process. Very thoughtful design, I commented, genuinely impressed. You've considered both the technical and human aspects of the security challenge. She beamed at the recognition. Your lecture last year about security with humanity inspired this approach. Technology should protect people, not just data. The reminder of my own core philosophy, something that had occasionally created tension with David's more profit-driven approach, was surprisingly centering amid the turmoil of recent weeks. This museum, these students, represented what had drawn me to technology in the first place, its power to solve meaningful problems and create positive change. As I prepared to leave, the museum director pulled me aside. Emma, I know things must be incredibly hectic with the company. Transition. It means a lot that you still made time for this program. This matters, I replied simply. Perhaps more than ever right now. The brief immersion in purpose-driven technology provided a welcome reset after weeks focused on corporate crisis management. As I returned to my car, I felt more clear-headed about the path forward, both professionally and personally. Megan called as I was driving home. We've completed a thorough sweep of your residence. All secure now, with enhanced monitoring in place. My team will maintain surveillance overnight. Any additional evidence about who attempted access? Forensic analysis of the device they used to attack your security panel suggests professional-grade equipment, not something an amateur would possess. Meaning either corporate espionage or someone with resources, I concluded. Correct. We've adjusted security accordingly. Arriving home, I noted the subtle signs of Megan's security enhancements, new camera positions, reinforced entry points, the barely visible outline of a signal jammer designed to prevent electronics surveillance. The beautiful modernist home that had once represented success and partnership now felt more like a fortress, necessary, but somehow diminished by the need for such protections. Inside, I moved through my evening routine with mechanical efficiency, my mind continuously processing the day's developments. The town hall had stabilized internal perceptions. The security breaches, both corporate and personal, suggested escalating desperation. The financial irregularities Marcus had uncovered potentially shifted the situation from corporate governance issues to legal jeopardy for David. My phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it to find a text that could only be from David. This path leads nowhere good for either of us. The European transactions weren't what they appear. Meet me tomorrow to discuss a genuine resolution before irreversible damage occurs. The usual place, 8 a.m. The usual place referred to a small coffee shop midway between our home and the original office, where we had built Ellis Innovations, a location we had used for years when needing to have difficult conversations, away from corporate headquarters. I forwarded the message to Ryan from legal and Megan from security, adding, "No response planned. Documenting contact in violation of separation agreement. Megan, can you have someone observe this location tomorrow at 8 a.m.? I won't be attending, but want to know if he appears." Ryan responded immediately. Documented. This violates communication protocol stipulated in separation agreement. Grounds for penalty clause activation if you wish to pursue. Megan's reply came moments later. Surveillance arranged. Recommend continued non-engagement. Message patterns suggest increasing instability. The analysis aligned with my own assessment. David's tactics were becoming less strategic and more reactive, shifting from calculated manipulation to increasingly desperate outreach. The mention of the European transactions was particularly telling, a reference to what Eleanor had described as potentially crossing into financial fraud. I prepared for bed with the disciplined routine that had sustained me through months of investigation and weeks of transition leadership. Tomorrow would bring the board meeting, continued security challenges, and likely new attempts by David to regain control of the narrative. My best defense remained what it had been from the start: methodical preparation, clear-eyed assessment, and strategic rather than emotional responses. As I finally lay in the darkness, I allowed myself to acknowledge the strangeness of this new reality. 3 months ago, I had been half of a power couple, co-founder of a successful company, outwardly living the innovation dream. Now I was a corporate leader managing crisis, a soon-to-be divorced woman requiring security protection, and the central figure in what might become a significant business scandal if the full extent of David's actions became public. Yet beneath, the turmoil lay an unexpected clarity. The betrayal had stripped away pretenses, removing the compromises and accommodations that had gradually accumulated over 13 years. What remained was a distilled version of my original purpose: creating technology that mattered, building an organization with integrity, and refusing to accept betrayal as an inevitable cost of success. My phone chimed once more. Another message from the unknown number. "Emma, please. There are aspects to the situation you don't understand. Things I did to protect the company, not harm it. At least hear me out before tomorrow's board meeting." I didn't respond, setting the phone aside after forwarding this additional contact to Ryan and Megan. David's appeal to private understanding outside formal channels was exactly the approach I had anticipated. The negotiator attempting to circumvent established processes, the manipulator seeking a venue where his persuasive skills might regain effectiveness. Whatever tomorrow brought, whether escalation or resolution, my path remained clear. The company would continue its security investigation. The board would review the financial irregularities. The separation agreement would be enforced. And I would continue leading with the clear-eyed determination that had carried me from the initial discovery of betrayal to this moment of reckoning. The anniversary dinner that David had planned as a facade covering his betrayal had instead become the catalyst for truth. Painful, but ultimately clarifying. Whatever he had intended that evening, the outcome had revealed not just his deception, but my own capacity for strategic response. Not just his betrayal, but my resilience in its wake. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. But for tonight, in the quiet darkness of the home we had once shared, I allowed myself to recognize an unexpected truth. Through the process of uncovering and responding to David's betrayal, I had rediscovered parts of myself that had gradually been overshadowed in our partnership. The technical visionary, the strategic thinker, the principled leader, all emerging more clearly now that I was no longer defining myself in relation to his larger-than-life presence. The realization carried me into sleep more peacefully than I had expected, not despite the security concerns and corporate challenges, but perhaps because of the clarity they had ultimately forced. Sometimes it takes a seismic disruption to reveal the true foundation beneath the structures we build. In my case, that foundation was proving stronger than either David or I had recognized. 6 months after the anniversary dinner that changed everything, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel, accepting the Women in Technology Leadership Award. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same hotel where I had first discovered David and Vanessa together, their reflected images in the lobby's marble column revealing a truth I hadn't been looking for. "Thank you for this recognition," I addressed the audience of industry leaders, investors, and technology innovators. Though I must acknowledge that leadership is never a solo achievement. The past year has taught me that our greatest challenges often reveal our most important collaborators. In the front row sat my core team, Jen, Marcus, Ryan, and Megan, the allies who had helped transform betrayal into renewal. Behind them, rows of Ellis Innovations employees attended in support, their presence a testimony to the company's resilience through transition. When we founded Ellis Innovations 13 years ago, we believed that security technology should serve people, not just protect data. That principle has guided us through both innovation and transformation. The transformation had been more complex and ultimately more profound than I could have imagined on that fateful night 6 months earlier. The company had not just survived David's departure, but emerged stronger, with clearer purpose and more authentic leadership. Today, I'm pleased to announce that Ellis Innovations has completed its leadership transition. After serving as interim CEO, I'll be returning to my role as Chief Technology Officer, while Jennifer Wilson has been appointed by our board as the company's new Chief Executive Officer. Applause erupted as Jen stood briefly, acknowledging the announcement that we had carefully coordinated for this public venue. The decision had evolved organically over months of working closely through the crisis. Recognizing that her operational strengths complemented my technical vision in ways that created more sustainable leadership than either of us could provide alone. This transition represents our commitment to collaborative leadership and recognition of complementary strengths. It also allows me to refocus on what initially inspired Ellis Innovations, creating security technology that genuinely serves human needs while setting new standards for the industry. As I concluded my remarks and descended from the stage, a steady stream of congratulations met me. Industry colleagues, investors, and competitors, all eager to connect with the woman who had not only survived a high-profile corporate drama, but emerged as a respected industry leader in her own right. Beautifully handled, Eleanor Reynolds approached, elegant as always in her signature understated style. As board chair, she had been instrumental in supporting the leadership transition. The market will respond positively to both the stability and the forward-looking approach. The stability is real, I noted as we moved toward a quieter corner of the reception. Q3 results exceeded projections for the first time since the transition began. And the Phoenix project? Back on. Schedule after the security reset. The compartmentalized development approach actually improved the architecture in unexpected ways. Eleanor nodded with satisfaction. And the other matter? Any further developments? The other matter was our delicate shorthand for the ongoing investigation into David's financial irregularities and the technology transfer to Vertex. What had begun as a corporate governance issue had evolved into a complex legal situation with potential criminal implications. The SEC has moved from informal inquiry to formal investigation, I confirmed quietly. Their focus remains on the European transactions and the apparent connection to Vertex. David's attorneys have proposed another settlement offer, more reasonable than previous attempts, but still inadequate given the scope of misconduct. And Vanessa Barnes, cooperating with investigators, according to Ryan's sources. Apparently, she's negotiating for immunity in exchange for detailed testimony about David's activities. Eleanor's expression tightened slightly. The closest. She typically came to displaying strong emotion. Loyalty appears in short supply among those who betray others. The observation struck me as particularly apt. In the months since their departure, the relationship between David and Vanessa had reportedly collapsed under legal pressure, with each seemingly willing to implicate the other to secure better personal outcomes. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus, tablet in hand as always. Sorry to intrude, but you asked to be notified immediately about any developments. The judge just ruled on the injunction against Vertex. And? Eleanor asked, professional interest overriding. Social niceties. Complete victory, Marcus reported with satisfaction. The court has barred Vertex from using any technology derived from the compromised Phoenix specifications. Their entire security suite development has been halted pending full investigation. The news represented a significant milestone in our efforts to contain the damage from David's betrayal. The court's ruling validated our claims that proprietary technology had been misappropriated, creating both legal and market consequences for our competitors' willing participation in corporate espionage. Excellent, Eleanor nodded. I assume Their stock is already responding? Down 12% in after-hours trading, Marcus confirmed. Our legal team is preparing a measured statement acknowledging the ruling without appearing to celebrate a competitor's difficulties. As Marcus departed to coordinate communication strategies, Eleanor regarded me with thoughtful assessment. 6 months ago, you were prepared for a celebratory anniversary dinner, unaware your husband was planning to remove you from the company you co-founded. Today, you're announcing a leadership transition on your own terms, while your former partner faces potential securities fraud charges. Life takes unexpected turns. Indeed, I acknowledged, though I've learned the difference between unexpected events and revealing events. David's betrayal didn't change who he was. It simply revealed it. The observation had emerged during my sessions with Dr. Harriet Chen, the executive psychologist Eleanor had recommended during the initial weeks after the confrontation. While I had initially resisted the suggestion of professional support, those conversations had proven invaluable in processing both the personal and professional dimensions of David's deception. "And what has this period revealed about you?" Eleanor inquired with genuine curiosity. The question warranted thoughtful consideration. "That I value integrity over appearances, that I can lead through crisis without sacrificing my principles, and that I'm ultimately more drawn to creation than corporate politics. Hence the return to the CTO role rather than maintaining the CEO position." Eleanor nodded with understanding. "The board respects that decision, though many felt you were excelling as chief executive. Leadership isn't about holding the highest title," I replied. "It's about creating the most value from your authentic strengths. Jen's operational excellence paired with my technical vision creates better leadership than either of us could provide alone." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Michael from sales, who approached with uncharacteristic urgency. "Emma, sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation developing that requires your attention." The phrasing immediately triggered my awareness. Situation developing was our established code for security or crisis issues requiring discreet handling. Excusing myself from Eleanor, I followed Michael to a private alcove where Megan waited, her typically composed expression betraying unusual tension. "What's happening?" I asked once we were safely isolated from the reception crowd. "David has arrived at the hotel," Megan reported tersely. "Attempted to enter the ballroom but was intercepted by security per established protocols. He's demanding to speak with you, claiming urgent information relevant to the SEC investigation." The news was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. In the months since his departure, David had made several attempts to establish direct communication outside legal channels, each rejected in accordance with the separation agreement and ongoing legal proceedings. "His timing is calculated," Michael observed. "Showing up at a high-profile industry event guarantees witnesses for whatever he's planning." "Precisely why we maintain protocols," I replied, my mind already processing options and potential consequences. "Where is he now?" "Security is holding him in the hotel manager's office," Megan reported. "He appears agitated but not aggressive. Claims he has critical information about the European transactions that will exonerate him if delivered directly to you." I considered the situation carefully. The most prudent course would be maintaining complete separation, allowing security to remove him from the premises while documenting the violation of court-ordered distance requirements. Yet something about the timing, coinciding with both the leadership announcement and the Vertex injunction, suggested a calculated desperation that might warrant careful handling. "Have Ryan join us in the hotel manager's office," I decided. "Document everything, record if legally permitted. I'll hear what he has to say, but only with legal counsel present and security monitoring." Megan frowned slightly, her security's instincts clearly favoring complete avoidance. "He's likely attempting manipulation through direct contact. Every previous communication has proven misleading or incomplete." "Probably," I acknowledged. "But given the SEC developments and today's Vertex ruling, there's a small possibility he genuinely has information we should consider. We'll maintain all protections while evaluating what he presents. Minutes later, I entered the hotel manager's office with Ryan and Megan flanking me protectively. David stood by the window, his appearance markedly changed from the polished executive I had confronted 6 months earlier. His designer suit hung slightly loose, his typically perfect haircut grown out, his posture lacking the confident command that had once been his trademark. "Emma!" He turned at our entrance, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." "This isn't a personal meeting," I clarified immediately. "I've agreed to hear information potentially relevant to ongoing legal matters, nothing more. Mr. Bennett is present as counsel, and this conversation is being recorded with the hotel manager's permission." David's gaze flickered to Ryan and Megan before returning to me with something approaching genuine regret. "I understand. This isn't how I imagined we would eventually speak again, but circumstances have left few options. What information do you believe is so urgent it justifies violating the separation agreement?" Ryan asked crisply, establishing the business nature of the interaction. David reached slowly into his jacket, telegraphing his movements under Megan's watchful eye, and withdrew a small flash drive. "This contains evidence regarding the European transactions that the SEC is investigating. It proves I was attempting to prevent corporate espionage, not facilitate it." "You could have provided this through proper legal channels," Ryan noted, skeptically. "I tried," David insisted. "My attorneys submitted documentation repeatedly, but the narrative was already established. No one was actually reviewing the evidence with fresh eyes." I studied him carefully, noting the signs of strain evident in his appearance. The man who had once commanded every room with charismatic confidence now projected an aura of desperate urgency. "What specifically does this evidence show?" I asked, maintaining professional distance. "That the European consultants were actually counterintelligence specialists hired to trace the source of technology leaks," David explained. "We had identified security breaches originating in the European development team, but couldn't determine who was responsible. The irregular payments were for an investigation conducted outside normal channels to avoid tipping off the actual perpetrators. The explanation was either an elaborate deception or a significant revelation that would recontextualize some of David's actions. Either way, it required careful evaluation rather than immediate dismissal. If true, why keep this hidden from me and the board?" I challenged. "Why not disclose the counterintelligence operation when questioned about the irregular transactions?" David's expression hardened slightly. "By that point, you had already assembled your case against me." The personal and professional were completely entangled. Would you have believed anything I said after finding Jessica's invitation? The reference to our anniversary dinner hung in the air between us, the catalyst that had transformed suspicion into action, betrayal into confrontation. The invitation was evidence of deception regardless of any security investigation, I replied evenly. As was your relationship with Vanessa Barnes and your documented efforts to undermine my position in the company. I made terrible personal choices, David acknowledged with what appeared to be genuine regret. The situation with Vanessa became complicated beyond what I initially intended. But the security investigation was legitimate, regardless of my personal failures. Ryan accepted the flash drive with evident skepticism. We'll have our security team evaluate this in an isolated environment before determining if it has merit. Is there anything else requiring this irregular communication channel? David hesitated, glancing at Megan and Ryan before addressing me directly. Just one thing, which I realize may have no impact at this point. Despite everything that's happened, I am proud of how you've led the company through this transition. The leadership change announced tonight is surprisingly insightful. I wouldn't have had the wisdom to step back from the CEO role to leverage complementary strengths. The unexpected acknowledgement caught me off guard, a moment of apparent sincerity amid months of legal maneuvering and attempted manipulation. "Thank you for the information," I replied neutrally, refusing to be drawn into personal reconciliation. "We'll evaluate it appropriately and respond through proper channels." As we prepared to leave, David made one final attempt at connection. "Emma, regardless of how the legal matters conclude, I want you to know that watching you transform betrayal into your finest professional moment has been illuminating. You've built something remarkable from what I destroyed." The comment lingered as we departed. Returning to the reception where industry colleagues remained unaware of the drama unfolding in a back office, Jen approached immediately, concern evident in her expression. "Everything okay? Michael mentioned a situation?" "David appeared with alleged evidence related to the European transactions," I explained quietly. "Ryan has the materials for proper evaluation. Nothing requiring immediate action." Jen's expression reflected skepticism similar to Megan's. "His timing seems calculated, arriving during your highest-profile industry appearance since the transition." "Undoubtedly," I agreed. Though whether it's desperation or strategy remains to be seen. The remainder of the evening proceeded without further incident. Acceptance speeches, industry networking, strategic conversations with key partners. Throughout, I maintained the professional composure that had become my hallmark during the transition period, while internally processing the unexpected encounter with David. Later that night, in the quiet of my hotel suite, Ryan called with preliminary findings. "Our security team conducted initial analysis of David's flash drive," he reported. "The documentation appears authentic, including communication with a legitimate European security firm specializing in corporate counterintelligence," suggesting his explanation about investigating internal leaks might have merit. "Partially," Ryan conceded reluctantly. "The investigation itself appears genuine, but significant questions remain about why it was concealed from the board and why it coincided with his relationship with Vanessa Barnes and efforts to reduce your role. The complex reality was emerging, not black and white betrayal versus loyalty, but layered motivations and actions where legitimate business concerns existed alongside personal deception." "How does this affect the SEC investigation?" asked, focusing on practical implications. "It complicates the narrative but doesn't eliminate concerns about governance and disclosure. Even if the payments were for legitimate security purposes, the lack of proper authorization and documentation represents significant procedural violations." After concluding the call, I moved to the hotel room window overlooking the city lights. 6 months of decisive action based on clear evidence of betrayal had created a compelling narrative that had carried me and the company through a critical transition. Now, David's final reveal suggested a more complex reality, not negating his betrayal but adding nuanced context that defied simple categorization. My phone chimed with a message from Jen. "Team celebration breakfast tomorrow, 8 a.m. Thought we could discuss next steps for the leadership transition before the press cycle begins." The message embodied everything that had emerged from the crisis. Practical focus on forward progress, collaborative planning, and genuine partnership in leadership. Whatever complicated truths might exist in David's past actions, the path forward remained clear and purposeful. I replied affirmatively, then set the phone aside to spend a few moments in reflection. The anniversary dinner that David had planned, as cover for ongoing deception, had instead become the catalyst for transformation. Personal and professional, individual and organizational. The betrayal had been real, the damage significant, but the reconstruction had ultimately created something stronger than what had been destroyed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, evaluating David's evidence, managing the public narrative around the leadership transition, continuing to rebuild trust with clients and investors. Yet unlike 6 months ago, when each day had been shadowed by deception and uncertainty, now each challenge would be faced with clarity of purpose and authentic collaboration. The woman who had walked into Belle Vie to confront her husband's betrayal had been fighting to save what she had built. The woman who accepted the Industry Leadership Award tonight was building something new, not despite the betrayal, but because of how she had chosen to respond to it. As I prepared for sleep, I realized that the most significant vindication wasn't the professional recognition, legal victories, or even David's reluctant acknowledgement of my leadership. It was the inner certainty that I had responded to betrayal, not by becoming bitter or vengeful, but by recommitting to the values and vision that had always been my authentic foundation. That realization, more than any award or title, represented the true victory emerging from that fateful anniversary dinner when my husband took his mistress to celebrate, and I showed up with the board of directors. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.